So, I came across a YouTube short the other day that asked a relatively simple question. Who is the greatest all-arounder in Naruto? Not the strongest person in Naruto, not the greatest user of ninjutsu, genjutsu, taijutsu, senjutsu, or kenjutsu. No, genuinely the best jack of all trades. The person who has the highest marks across the board in genjutsu, taijutsu, and ninjutsu, amongst all the other subcategories of jutsus. And I thought to myself, well, there's an answer to this, obviously. I mean, we have data book stats of every single character in Naruto. That gives a ranking of 1 out of 5 in categories like ninjutsu, genjutsu, taijutsu, intelligence, strength, all of that. But that's when I remembered that's only for the good guys. And if a good guy ever goes bad, well then unfortunately we only have the stats for when they were good. Which is why Obito's stats come in at an appalling 18, when somebody like Jiraiya, who was undoubtedly weaker than Obito at his strongest, stands at a 35.5. On top of this, not everyone gets stats. You have to play a pretty big role in the story to get stats, which is why characters like Shisui, who should be in consideration for this list, actually don't have stats. But as these stats do come from the data books themselves, they are something that we're gonna have to take into account here. So, as usual, it fell onto me to scour the internet, manga, and anime to find the genuine best jack-of-all-trade ninjas, and use any and all information I could get my grubby little mitts on to decide once and for all who was the greatest well-rounded ninja of all time. So with no further ado, let's get directly into the best ninjas of all time, ranked and explained. But before we get to ranking or explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. So, before we dive into this list, I want to lay down some rules. I am going to be judging these ninjas based off the criteria that the data books judged them on. That is to say, ninjutsu, taijutsu, genjutsu, intelligence, strength, speed, and stamina. Now, openly, I'd just like to identify my bias here. I am going to be weighting the usage of jutsus more heavily than things like strength, speed, or intelligence. Today, I'd like to answer the question of who is the best all-around jutsu user as opposed to who is just the best all-around ninja. But strength, speed, intelligence, and stamina absolutely will be taken into account. However, I'm also going to be taking a couple of other key factors into consideration, like senjutsu, kenjutsu, and fuinjutsu, because while obviously ninjutsu, genjutsu, and taijutsu do cover the majority of the jutsus in the Naruto universe, as the Naruto universe continued to expand and the possible list of jutsus that you could learn got ever longer, well, some people adapted to this expansion and displayed high-level fuinjutsu, high-level kenjutsu, high-level senjutsu. Some people didn't. And so, once again, I am gonna have to admit here that this list is gonna have an inherent bias towards people who have some form of sage mastery. It's a thing that any ninja could train in, and if you want to be considered a fully well-rounded ninja, it's one of those things you probably should have trained in. But senjutsu isn't everything. Now that we've got the rules out of the way, let's get into our list. Starting with our number 10, and therefore last place entry, Sakura. Listen, out of anybody on this list, Sakura probably had the most potential to be higher. Sakura has Earth, Water, Fire, Yin, and Yang release, giving her the lowest amount of chakra releases out of anybody on this list. However, with Sakura's Yin release being widely regarded as one of the most impressive coming out of her time as a genin, that should have most likely translated into her becoming a genjutsu master, even though being 10 on this list is still a very impressive feat. If she had leaned into becoming a genjutsu master, she could have been even higher. See, because when it comes to taijutsu prowess, there's very few people in the Naruto universe that stand a chance against Sakura. Sakura, purely through the power of the strength of her own taijutsu, and without using the strength of 100 seal, mind you, was able to box on an even basis with Shin Uchiha, who was probably about as strong as an alive Madara. Now, obviously, she gets placed in a disadvantageous situation through the course of this fight, but I'd once again like to remind you that she does not use her strength of 100 seal in that fight. There's really no reason for us to believe that Sakura's level of taijutsu is anywhere below any other member of Team 7, as she, like all of the other members of Team 7, was able to hang in the battle against Kaguya and even land a decisive blow against her. And while Sakura may not be as fast or as tactical as the likes of Naruto or Sasuke, she trounces the both of them in terms of physical strength. Now, her data book stats are abysmal, getting a 3 in ninjutsu, a 3 in taijutsu, and a 3.5 in genjutsu. And to add insult to injury, she gets a 3 in the strength category. But mind you, they stopped doing stats after the 3rd data book, and there are 4 data books for just Naruto, and thus none of this tabulates the strength that she had during the 4th grade Shinobi World War. And that same line of logic goes for every person whose stats we're going to talk about today. So some of the people on this list who were able to achieve the peak of their strength prior to the war arc are going to seem as though their stats are massively higher than people who we know are stronger than them. On top of all of this, while Sakura isn't necessarily known for her massive offensive ninjutsu, medical ninjutsu should absolutely fall under the purview of what we consider to be strong ninjutsu. And consider the fact that if Sakura isn't the greatest medical ninjutsu specialist of all time, she's second. That would mean in the ninjutsu category, Sakura passes with flying colors. And while in the anime and the manga, we've never seen Sakura use genjutsu, we actually have seen Sakura use genjutsu in the light novels. And one of the things she ever does is on par with something like Kodo Matsukame or Tsukiyomi or even some Rinnegan-based genjutsu. Her sheer inability to be affected by genjutsu definitely earns her some pretty high marks in the genjutsu category. However, based off the fact that she never really uses weapons, we've never seen her use any kind of fuinjutsu, her usage of genjutsu is limited at best, and even though she and Tsunade both should, she has no sage training. Unfortunately, I have to put her at the bottom of this list. One whole spot above her teacher, who's coming in at number 9, Kakashi. Now, this might come as a massive surprise to some of you because when thinking about all-around ninjas, Kakashi is probably one of the first names that pops into your head. And I couldn't blame you there. I mean, Kakashi is known as the copy ninja, a ninja with access to 1,000 jutsu. And yeah, when you're talking about incredible all-around ninjas in the Naruto universe, Kakashi should be a name you mention. It's why he's in the top 10. And his stats back up his claim to be in the top 10, as Kakashi gets a 5 in the ninjutsu ranking, a 4.5 in taijutsu, and a 4 in genjutsu. And across the board, out of a possible 40, he gets 34.5 points. One of the highest statistical metrics that we have out of any character in Naruto. Honestly, there's very little things that I can fault with Kakashi's game. Kakashi has copied and therefore has access to 1,000 plus jutsus. He is one of the very few people in the entire show with all 7 elemental releases: lightning, earth, water, wind, fire, and yin and yang. He is as proficient at creating mud walls as he is using his Raikiri or his water dragon. In any category, if you're talking about best blank release user, Kakashi's name needs to be mentioned. Tie that into the fact that he was able to stand toe-to-toe with the likes of a Rinnegan wielding Obito in a taijutsu battle, and battle it out with 7 swordsmen of the Mist Legends like Zabuza using Kenjutsu. And yes, Kakashi is very easily one of the greatest all-arounders in Naruto history. So why is he as low as number 9? I mean, this man casually wielded one of the 7 swords of the Mist. He was able to partially seal away the curse mark placed on Sasuke by Orochimaru. He is one of the cooler summonings in the entire universe, being able to summon a pack of Ninken. Well, unfortunately, it comes down to 2 aspects: lack of senjutsu and lack of genjutsu. Yes, is it 100% established that Kakashi should be a proficient genjutsu user by the databooks, as he has a 4 out of possible 5 points in the genjutsu category. 100%. However, Kakashi was a Sharingan for 90% of Naruto's runtime, and is one of the biggest and therefore most frequently seen characters in Naruto as a story. Only uses genjutsu openly 3 times. The first of which is against a Genin Sakura, who doesn't understand what genjutsu is and also doesn't know how to break herself out of it. He then used genjutsu in his battle against Zabuza, manipulating Zabuza into believing that Kakashi could see into the future so that Kakashi could use the jutsu that they were both about to do before Zabuza could. He then uses genjutsu against 2 members from the Root and Shippuden to put them to sleep instantly, but that is it. Now, he does also kind of use it in his battle against Obito in the Kamui dimension, but that's never explicitly stated. Like, yes, Obito is trying to use genjutsu on Kakashi, and Kakashi may be fighting against that using his own genjutsu. And if you wanted to go through that line of logic, that would state that Kakashi and Obito are evenly matched in genjutsu, but we can't say for certain. But what we can say for certain is the fact that Might Guy had to develop a new form of fighting to use against Kakashi, where he only looked at the feats of his opponent. And he would do this because he knew he couldn't look Kakashi in the eye, implying that if Might Guy ever made eye contact with Kakashi, Kakashi would immediately be able to place him in genjutsu, which isn't all that impressive for a guy whose ninjutsu capabilities max out at summoning a giant turtle, but still, it needs to be noted. So simply based on the fact that Kakashi has no Sage Mode going for him and isn't all that known for his genjutsu, I'm gonna have to put him at number 9. Directly below, and trust me when I say this hurts me as much as it hurts you, Shisui, who's coming in at 8. Do I hate putting Shisui, who has next to no feats, above anybody who has a ton of feats? Yes, 100%. However, if you're talking about genuinely all-time all-arounders, Shisui's name has to be in the mix. Now, Shisui didn't play a big enough role in Naruto to get his own stat sections from the databook. However, I can tell you right now, if he were to ever get an assessment in terms of stats, his genjutsu, ninjutsu, and taijutsu would all be pretty close to 5. And I can outright guarantee you that at least his genjutsu section would be a 5. See, not only is Shisui the youngest ever person to awaken an MS, awakening it at 7 years old, but he was also well respected for his abilities that didn't fall within the purview of his MS. See, Shisui's flame release was apparently so incredibly hot and so high level that he had to use Anbu level water release inside of his own mouth to make sure that it didn't scorch him. A problem that no other Uchiha in the history of Uchihas, at least so far as we know, has had. Now, outside of fire release, Shisui was also known for having wind, lightning, and yin release. So actually, I lied earlier when I said that Sakura had the least amount of elemental releases out of anybody on this list. It's actually Shisui. However, Shisui has a Susanoo. On top of that, before Shisui even unlocked his MS at 7 years old, he was known as Shisui of the Body Flicker, a technique that allowed for Shisui to move so incredibly fast that he could leave real, tangible after images. A technique that he would use in combination with his short sword to wipe out enemies with low to no effort. Two abilities that fall under the purview of high-level taijutsu and or kenjutsu. And thus, while Shisui may not have been as great a ninjutsu specialist as Kakashi, with nowhere near 1,000 jutsus under his belt, the difference in genjutsu ability between Kakashi and Shisui is greater than the difference in ninjutsu ability between the two of them, as Shisui is one of the top 3 greatest genjutsu users of all time in the Naruto universe, while also holding on to a level of ninjutsu and taijutsu prowess that I believe rivals that of Kakashi. But since we're talking about dead Uchihas, let's get to our number 7 entry on this list, Itachi. Listen, if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. I believe Itachi was a better genjutsu user than Shisui. Yes, I get Kodo Matsukame has a higher ceiling than that of Tsukiyomi, and Kodo Matsukame could probably be used to kill if you just place somebody under a Kodo Matsukame and change the personality to that of, you know, Kurt Cobain. But Tsukiyomi has actually killed before, as when Itachi at the beginning of the Uchiha Massacre placed his girlfriend under Tsukiyomi and had her live out the rest of her life with Itachi in the Tsukiyomi universe. When she woke up, she was so shocked that she was back in the real world that her heart literally stopped, something that Itachi could feasibly do again. Tie that into the fact that Tsukiyomi can be used more than once a decade, and yeah, I think Itachi's genjutsu prowess is at least as high as Shisui's. On top of that, we have stats for Itachi, who is tied for first in terms of highest ranking out of all ninjas in Naruto, with a ranking of 35.5 points out of a possible 40, backed up by his 5 in ninjutsu, his 4.5 in taijutsu, and his 5 in genjutsu. If it weren't for his 2.5 in stamina, Itachi would almost have a perfect score, as the only 3 things that Itachi does not have a 5 in are stamina, speed, and taijutsu, all things that are obviously directly tied to his decaying body. And while Itachi didn't have a ton of elemental releases, just being a wielder of fire, wind, water, yin, and yang, he, like Shisui, has access to a Susanoo, but his Susanoo is better than Shisui's, because his Susanoo has 2 incredibly broken spiritual weapons, in the Yata Mirror and the Sword of Totsuka. He was able to place Kakashi, who was only staring at him with the Sharingan under Tsukiyomi, block a Kirin from Sasuke, break a Chibaku Tensai from an Edo Nagato at the peak of his power, use Izanami to seal away a Dragon Sage Kabuto, and use Genjutsu to flip a body control technique placed on him by Orochimaru back onto Orochimaru, so badly that Orochimaru had to break their own pinky to get out of it. The only thing keeping Itachi out of the top 5 on this list is his lack of sage training, stamina, and strength. Not even speed. He has a 5 in speed, and that's with a decaying body. He is one of the fastest people in the universe, and to me is one of the most clearly well-rounded ninjas in the entirety of the Naruto universe. But unfortunately, he falls flat in a couple of categories that others shine in, like our number 6 entry, Obito. See, like it or not, pretty much everything that Itachi does, Obito does better. Well, the only data book stats that we have on Obito were from his time as a Chunin, and therefore he comes in at a paltry 18 when we all know he ends up much higher than that. There's basically nothing that A, Obito doesn't do, and B, doesn't do at its highest possible level. Obito, using mostly taijutsu, but I guess it would be more accurately called nin taijutsu because it uses his kamui in conjunction with his own taijutsu prowess, was able to go toe-to-toe with the likes of a KCM1 Naruto, Killer Bee, Kakashi, and Might Guy at the beginning of the Fourth War. His ninjutsu prowess, which is mostly predicated on the usage of his kamui, but is also absolutely not limited just to the usage of his kamui, as he has shown high-level wood release, fire release, lightning release, water release, wind release, yin release, yang release, and yin-yang release, giving him the most elemental releases out of anybody we've talked about on this list thus far, is at some of the highest level out of anybody in the Naruto universe. I mean, he's shown ninjutsu usage so incredibly fast that he was able to teleport Sasuke out of an actively building around him dust release. He created 6 paths of pain out of dead Jinchuriki. He was able to wield the Sword of Ninabuko while being a 10 Tails Jinchuriki, a yin-yang release jutsu so strong it's said to be able to deconstruct the entire world, all the while having a genjutsu prowess so incredibly strong that 1, it was originally his plan to use infinite Tsukiyomi, and 2, even without being a 10 Tails Jinchuriki, his just straight up Sharingan genjutsu ability was enough to use essentially a version of Kodo Matsukame against Yagura, the 4th Mizukage, so powerful powerful that one, Yagura didn't know he was under the effect of this genjutsu for years, and two, when he was broken out of it, the shock of being broken out of it literally killed him. However, as a 10-tails Jinchuriki, technically Obito is our first entry that does have senjutsu training, because as a 10-tails Jinchuriki with Rinnegan, technically he was accessing 6 paths chakra, which means the entirety of the time that Obito was flying around as Jubito, he was using 6 paths senjutsu. And while he definitely wasn't using 6 paths senjutsu on par with characters like Madara or even Naruto, he is a high-level sage. On top of that, he's a high-level kenjutsu user. Whether it was his usage of the Soren Nunabuko or the Uchiha Gunbai, Obito showed time and time again that he was a high-level weapons expert, who also had the ability to summon and control the Geto statue, inarguably the strongest summoning in the entirety of the Naruto universe. So yeah, he should probably be top 5, but unfortunately everybody above him is just a bit more insane than even he is. Like our number 5 entry, Sasuke. Much like how everything Itachi did, Obito did better, unfortunately for Obito, everything Obito did, Sasuke did better. Now, Sasuke's bag is technically not as deep as Obito's. While Obito had access to things like Wood Release, Yin Release, Yang Release, Yin Yang Release, Sasuke only has access to the 5 basic elemental releases and Yin Release. No Yang, no Yin Yang. And Sasuke's stats put him at a paltry 31.5. 4 whole points lower than his own brother. We all know, or at least we should all know, that Sasuke ends up stronger than his brother. So where do these stats go wrong? Well, like we established, they stopped doing stats after the 3rd data book, and therefore this doesn't take into account Sasuke's 4th Great Ninja War strength, and it definitely doesn't take into account Sasuke's Boruto level strength. Now, the only real place that Obito tends to trounce Sasuke so far as being an all-arounder goes is the fact that Sasuke is not a sage. Yes, Sasuke does get 6 paths chakra, but no, Sasuke never uses that 6 paths chakra in a senjutsu sense. However, the combination of having access to 6 paths chakra and being able to pull off things like 6 paths Chibaku Tensai, while also for the majority of the story having access to a version of Sage Mode through the medium of his curse mark, does mean that Sasuke does deserve some points in terms of the senjutsu category. And while technically, yes, Obito did have access to more elemental releases than Sasuke, Sasuke uses ninjutsu on a way higher level than Obito ever does. As really the most impressive displays of Obito's ninjutsu prowess come in the form of either things like a great fireball technique that he either just uses traditionally or twists with his Kamui, or his Wood Release, which he doesn't really use at all that high a level. Well, that's not necessarily true. He is able to use things like Wood Dragon. But like I've said previously, if you're gonna compare the ninjutsu prowess of 2 people, and one of those people has a Susanoo and the other doesn't, then you probably gotta give the ninjutsu category to the person with the Susanoo. And while Obito does technically have a Susanoo, that Susanoo belongs more to Kakashi than it does to Obito. And thus, considering the fact that we've seen Sasuke do things like literally pull lightning out of the sky and turn it into an ancestral god to try and kill his brother with, or form lightning into a gigantic arrow to go up against the jutsu that it technically has a chakra weakness against in a wind-style massive 6 paths Rasen-tailed beast shuriken. If we're talking about who's better in the ninjutsu category here, I gotta give that to Sasuke. On top of that, in the taijutsu category, Sasuke has gone toe-to-toe with the likes of Itachi, Rock Lee, and Naruto. Some of, if not the greatest taijutsu practitioners of all time. And in Boruto, he's thrown knuckles with literal gods like Momoshiki with 1 arm. And therefore, even though Sasuke doesn't have a nin taijutsu that's boosted through the medium of Kamui, I would say if we're saying just straight up taijutsu ability, Sasuke's got Obito beat. Especially when you consider the fact that Kakashi probably had Obito beat. And while genjutsu isn't something that we see Sasuke use often, the sheer fact that he was able to knock out a 4th Great Shinobi World War Sakura with a Rinnegan-based genjutsu shows that he is one of the greatest genjutsu users living. And thus, even though his senjutsu categorization is definitely below that of Obito's, I'd say overall, he's just a better all-arounder. But with Sasuke now given probably more props than he deserves, let's get to our number 4 spot. Jiraiya. See, Jiraiya is well regarded as one of the strongest ninjas in Naruto. A ninja so incredibly powerful that the combined forces of Itachi and Kisame both said, nah, I think we'll pass on that smoke. A ninja so incredibly powerful that he was able to take down 4 of the 6 paths of pain with no prior knowledge on how their ability worked. The way that he accomplished all of this was by being a genuinely talented all-around ninja. See, because if I was to genuinely ask you what makes Jiraiya so strong, well, you definitely would have an answer. Your answer would actually probably differ differ from the answer somebody else would give. Some people would say his imperfect Sage Mode. Others would say his mastery over the Rasengan, while even others would say his Toad-based summons. But there's also his intelligence, his strength, his speed, his ridiculous pool of chakra, his ability to pull off high-level ninjutsu. There are so many things that make Jiraiya a wildly talented ninja, which is very clearly indicated by his stats given to us in the third data book that showed us that Jiraiya had a 35.5 out of 40 possible points, riding largely off the back of his 5 in ninjutsu, his 4.5 in taijutsu, his 5 in stamina, and his 4.5 in intelligence, strength, and speed. Now, admittedly, in the stats category, Jiraiya was given a 3 out of 5 in genjutsu, and while I think that's probably a fair assessment of Jiraiya's personal genjutsu ability, let's not forget that Jiraiya has the ability to summon Ma and Pa, who fuse themselves to his shoulders, and they have a sound-based genjutsu that was so incredibly powerful that it was able to trap one of the paths in pain, and a genjutsu so complete it couldn't break out of it. The demonic Toad confrontation chant, a genjutsu so wildly powerful, yet the only way out of it is either death or to be released from it. And while technically that genjutsu doesn't belong to Jiraiya, as that genjutsu can only be used by Toads who know the ancient song and have memorized it, Jiraiya does still have access to it through the medium of his summons. And as the strength of your summons is absolutely something that we are taking into account here when talking about all-around ninja, those are points that we should be giving Jiraiya. Now, is this genjutsu as powerful as things like Kodomatsukame or Tsukiyomi? No. Once you're caught under this genjutsu, yes, it is as powerful as Kodomatsukame or Tsukiyomi. However, it requires a bunch of setup to pull off. Ma and Pa have to warm up their throats. It's a relatively long song, and singing it is so harsh on Ma and Pa's throats that they can only do it once every couple of days. And while using a genjutsu once every couple of days is way better than Kodomatsukame's time limit, Toad Confrontation Chant definitely isn't as useful as Tsukiyomi, even though Itachi can really only use Tsukiyomi once every couple of days. But Toad Confrontation Chant does have a leg up on at least Tsukiyomi, as it doesn't require eye contact to cast somebody under the genjutsu. They just need to hear the song the Toads are singing. As Tayuya displayed to us in the Sasuke retrieval arc, sound-based genjutsu are some of the strongest jutsus in the entirety of the Naruto universe. So considering the fact from a taijutsu and ninjutsu perspective, Jiraiya is on par with people like Itachi, and from a genjutsu perspective, he has arguments to state that he could be one of the greatest genjutsu users in all of Naruto, tied in with the fact that he is a pretty close to perfect Toad Sage, means to me that Jiraiya is a better all-around ninja than even the likes of Sasuke. His summons are better, his genjutsu is close to equal, his taijutsu and his ninjutsu are definitely equal, as he has a 5 in the ninjutsu category, and his speed, strength, and intelligence are all comparable to that of Sasuke's. Remember, this is not a video talking about who's stronger. I understand that Sasuke is stronger than Jiraiya. This is a video asking the question of who diversified themselves across an abundance of abilities better. And to me, at least, I believe the answer there is Jiraiya. But if you didn't like Jiraiya at number 4, you're gonna hate Hiruzen Sarutobi at number 3. Yeah, I have Hiruzen above Itachi, Obito, and Sasuke. Hell, I have him above Jiraiya and Kakashi. And you know, for a while, I wasn't gonna have him this high. In fact, in my first run through of this script, I had Hiruzen at number 9. You can't read that, I don't know why I'm showing you. But then I saw his stats. His late 60s, early 70s stats, which if you're just looking at Hiruzen's totals, isn't all that impressive, as Hiruzen clocks in with a 34 out of 40 possible points, putting him lower than other people on this list like Jiraiya, Itachi, and Kakashi. But do you want to know why Hiruzen has 34 out of 40 possible points, 6 points away from perfect? Well, that's because his speed, strength, and stamina are all 3s, on account of the fact that he was 70 when these stats were taken. That literally, and I mean literally, every other category is perfect. Hiruzen has a 5 in ninjutsu, a 5 in taijutsu, a 5 in genjutsu, a 5 in intelligence, and a 5 in hand seals. He is the only person who has stats to have a 5 in all 3 categories of jutsus. Not Jiraiya, not Itachi, not Kakashi. Hiruzen and Hiruzen alone gets a perfect score in the ninjutsu, taijutsu, genjutsu 15 possible points. That means from the perspective of a jutsu user, Hiruzen is literally perfect. And while there's really no way for us to know what Prime Hiruzen looked like, if non-Prime Hiruzen only didn't get 40 points on account of the fact that when he got his statistical reading, he was 70 years old, it's safe for us to assume that a Prime Hiruzen probably would have been faster, stronger, and had more stamina. And thus Prime Hiruzen stats probably would have fell somewhere in the region of 38.5 to 40. A perfect possible score. And honestly, based off everything that we know about Hiruzen, this wouldn't be the craziest assumption of all time. time. Hiruzen, in his late 50s, was able to use his adamantite staff to push Kurama out of the village. He led Konoha through 3 great wars. He was able to battle against Orochimaru, Hashirama, and Tobirama simultaneously, even though it wasn't peak power Hashirama or Tobirama. He was known as the Professor, a man who had mastered every single jutsu of the leaf, something that apparently even Kakashi hasn't done. And in the early parts of Naruto, he was referred to as the God of Shinobi, the strongest ever shinobi, a man who ruled over Konoha for almost 50 years when the only criteria to be Hokage was to be the strongest person in the village. Now, we don't have a ton of fight data from Hiruzen, as he dies in basically his first real fight against Orochimaru, and then even when he's brought back in the 4th Great Shinobi World War, he doesn't play a huge role, but we do know, like a couple other people on this list, he has mastered all 7 elemental releases, the 5 nature releases, and yin and yang. On top of that, he knew so many jutsu that he was even able to baffle Orochimaru by pulling out a jutsu that they had never seen in the Reaper Death Seal. We've seen him involved in some of the most powerful Fuin jutsus of all time, like the sealing technique 3-direction seal, and maybe more importantly, the Red Yang formation, which requires 4 Kage level participants to create a massively powerful Fuin jutsu that was strong enough to be able to seal off the 10 tails. And while we've never necessarily seen him use any genjutsu, one, the fact that he was able to immediately deduce the genjutsu that Orochimaru used against him, the Dark Room genjutsu, and therefore figure out how to counteract it faster than Orochimaru could even calculate, and 2, the fact that the data books gave him a 5 in the genjutsu category means even though he wasn't busting out any genjutsu in his battle against Orochimaru, does not mean that he couldn't have. And while objectively Hiruzen wasn't a sage, he does have access to the 2nd strongest summoning in the entirety of the Naruto universe, Monkey King Enma, basically another Kage level threat who's able to turn himself into an adamantite staff, which is the hardest material in the Naruto universe, that operates like Monkey King Wukong or Goku's extendable staff. On top of that, as the leader of the Sarutobi clan, which is known for their fire release, Hiruzen was one of the most proficient fire release users ever. And therefore, while we may not have as much data on Hiruzen as we do on other people on this list, as the only person with a perfect 15 out of 15 points in the jutsu category, I believe he deserves to be pretty high up on this list. But don't worry, we're not done talking about Hokage yet, because coming up at number 2, we got Hashirama. Now listen, we don't have stats for Hashirama, and the diversity of jutsus that we've seen Hashirama use actually isn't all that great. See, we know that Hashirama has access to the 5 basic elemental releases, Wood release, and Yin and Yang release, and because we know he has access to Yin release, it's pretty safe for us to assume that he has access to Genjutsu, and we actually know that he has access to Genjutsu because in the manga, he's actually the person who uses the Bringer of Darkness technique, the technique that cloaks Hiruzen in a dark room that cuts off all of his senses. Now, this was changed in the anime adaptation because the jutsu itself seemed rather sinister, and the anime producers didn't want Hashirama, who was going to be seen as this golden boy, to have anything sinister attached to him. However, in the manga, it is established that he is a powerful genjutsu user, and this aligns basically with everything that we do know about Hashirama. I mean, Hashirama was the leader of the Senju during their most turbulent time ever. And we know that the name Senju actually stands for 1,000 tasks, as the true strength of the Senju wasn't founded in something like powerful eyes, but rather the ability to do everything well. And thus it's safe to assume that Hashirama, the leader of the Senju for 4-5 decades, was probably the best at doing lots of stuff. And this is shown to us time and time again. Well, there's really the only one circumstance where we ever see him use Genjutsu. The fact that that Genjutsu was powerful enough to work against Hiruzen, one of the greatest Genjutsu users of all time, apparently showed that his Genjutsu prowess should be considered on par with that of Hiruzen, maybe even greater, considering the fact that the Hashirama that Hiruzen was fighting against was not a peak power Hashirama, but it also wasn't a peak power Hiruzen. Outside of that, Hashirama is widely known for his ninjutsu ability, more specifically his Wood release, which operates at the highest level that we've seen out of any Wood release user ever, with the possible exception of Madara, because Madara was able to use a Deep Forest Emergence, but even then, Madara was never able to use the 1,000-arm Kanon that Hashirama was able to use. Considering that Hashirama's ninjutsu prowess was so incredibly high that he was able to punch a Susanoo off Kurama, if anybody should be talked about as the greatest ninjutsu user of all time, if it's not Hashirama, he's definitely in the top 3. On top of that, a lesser-known aspect of Hashirama's bag is the fact that he was an incredibly talented taijutsu/kenjutsu user, as oftentimes in his battles against Madara, we can see that he would unfurl an entire scroll filled with weapons, and he would battle against Madara, who would be wielding his Goombay Scythe combo with one of his gigantic Buster-esque swords. But a thing that a lot of people people do know about Hashirama's kit is the fact that he was heavily reliant on his Sage Mode. A Sage Mode that we as Naruto enjoyers don't actually fully understand. But know that the manifestation of this Sage Mode was very clearly perfect, as the only thing that changed about him was his eyes. And a Sage Mode that we understand granted him so much power that he was able to elevate from using wood golems to 1,000-armed canons. And thus, Hashirama is not only one of the greatest ninjutsu users of all time, but is apparently a competent enough genjutsu user that he's able to cast Hiruzen Sarutobi under a genjutsu that he can't snap out of, a taijutsu and kenjutsu user on par with the likes of Madara, and a perfect sage. And while we never saw Hashirama use a summon, when he can create a wood golem with a wood dragon wrapped around its neck or a 1,000-armed canon, you don't really need a summon. Tie that into his Fuinjutsu abilities like the God Gates, which he was able to hold down the Ten Tails and Jubito with, and yeah, if we're talking about one of the greatest well-rounded ninjas of all time, you'd be a fool to not put Hashirama at least in the top 3. But he's not number 1, because unfortunately, the number 1 spot belongs to Madara. Yes, I get that during their lifetimes, Hashirama was able to beat Madara in a fight. However, Madara had a lot more planned for his life than Hashirama did. See, when it comes down to it, amongst humans, Madara is probably the greatest genjutsu user of all time.
Oh, Nick, how can you say that when Shisui and Itachi exist?
Did Shisui or Itachi ever pull off infinite Tsukiyomi? Did they ever reflect their Rinne Sharingan off the moon and put the entire world under a genjutsu? No, they didn't? Yeah, I didn't think so. Madara could have never used genjutsu prior to pulling off infinite Tsukiyomi, and I would still call him the greatest genjutsu user of all time. On top of that, Madara is also very easily a top 3, maybe top 4 ninjutsu user of all time. The top 4 is any combination of Sasuke, Naruto, Hashirama, and Madara. I don't care what order you put it in. On top of this, I believe Madara has the second most elemental releases out of anybody in the Naruto universe, with the only person having access to more than him being Naruto. As Madara has access to the 5 basic elemental releases: Storm Release, Wood Release, Yin Release, Yang Release, and Yin Yang Release. As Madara, like Obito and like Naruto, had access to the True Seeker Orbs, but he also had 6-path Senjutsu Storm Release mouth lasers, and he was able to, after grafting Hashirama's cells onto his body, use Wood Release at a level comparable to that of Hashirama, creating a deep forest emergence that was so powerful that it almost killed all 5 of the Kage simultaneously. His taijutsu was so incredible that he was not only able to survive an encounter against 8th Gate Might Guy, but he was also able to dub 8th Gate Might Guy as the greatest taijutsu user he's ever fought against. He became a perfect sage through the medium of Hashirama's cells, and was also a 6-path sage, making him the only person in the Naruto universe outside of Naruto to master 2 different kinds of sage mode. And his kenjutsu was so legendary with the combination of his Goombay that he really didn't need to use anything but that to defeat massive swaths of enemies. Add that into the fact that he has 3 separate dojutsu: the Sharingan, the Rinnegan, and the Rinne Sharingan, all of which he can use at incredibly high levels, going so far as to have by far and away the most broken Rinnegan ability we've ever seen in Limbo clones. And yeah, if you had to make me pick the most well-rounded ninja in Naruto history, I'm going with Madara. But some of you might be scratching your head right now, because as I was praising Madara, I kept mentioning Naruto's name, and yet Naruto's not on the list. And like, yeah, Naruto's not on the list. Is Naruto one of the top 4 best ninjutsu users of all time? 100%. Is he probably the greatest taijutsu user in Naruto now that half of Might Guy's left foot is gone? Also, probably yes. Is he probably the greatest Sage Mode user of all time? Probably yes. Does he have access to the most elemental releases out of anybody in the Naruto universe? 100% yes. Having access to an absolutely ludicrous, I have to count, 3, 6, 9, 11 releases, which are the 5 basic elemental releases: Yin, Yang, Yin Yang, Lava, Magnet, and Boil release, making him undoubtedly one of the most diversified ninja in the entirety of Naruto's history, and yet he lacks one thing that everybody else on this list has: any and all genjutsu. In fact, by the time that the 3rd data book rolled around, Naruto only had a 2 in genjutsu, after receiving 1s in both the 1st and 2nd data books. And while his stats are definitely not that low anymore, that should be a pretty good indicator of what Naruto's genjutsu prowess looks like. So is he an incredibly well-rounded ninja? Yes, 100%, but he's not in the top 10. He's probably like 12 or 13. And thus that gives us one of the first Naruto lists we've ever made that doesn't have Naruto at the top of it, which is exciting. And if that's as exciting to you as it is to me, let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. It's a cold day in hell when I put Sasuke on a good list and not Naruto.